When we invite speakers to speak here, we start with, it helps if we have a compelling title. And sometimes the speaker says, yeah, I don't know, maybe just put my bio up and my name. And Paul came back with, was it Confessions of a Serial Entrepreneur?
Close, but
but a serial entrepreneur grabbed me. So I've known Paul for a few months now, and he has the most interesting business in Thousand Oaks you may never have heard of. And I'm really excited to hear his story and to learn a little bit more about what he does and about how he got to where he is. So Paul Shrater.
Cool, thank you. I've got my cheat sheet, so I'm going to go off that. Can you hear me with the mic? Do I need to talk louder? By the way, Mike and Greg, thank you. You guys are doing amazing things at Hub 101. If you haven't been there, you definitely should go check it out. That's why I'm here, having met them and gotten in touch with the growing entrepreneurial community in Thousand Oaks and Westlake surrounding areas. So definitely encourage you to do that. By the way, I realized driving over here tonight, I was standing in almost this very spot 30 years ago. It was the starting line of the Thousand Oaks High School cross-country team. None of these buildings were here. So it's kind of fun to be back standing here, a lot more rested and heavier. But I began my entrepreneurial journey probably right out of college. I went to the Wharton School with a focus on entrepreneurial management back when it was hidden in the corner of the campus and everybody was going onto Wall Street. Now things have changed because back then to be an entrepreneur you had to have rich parents. I did not. And now for $49 a month and some AliExpress drop shipping and some Facebook ads, you too can be an entrepreneur. I wouldn't recommend that path, but a lot easier to do it now than it was back then. So my first journey in entrepreneurship was in film and television, which I think was hinted at in the bio there. I went to become a film and television producer and writer in the entertainment industry in Southern California. So I came back home, sold a script for $1 million. We were just talking about that outside. It never got made, even though they spent more than $1.3 million rewriting it. So there's all sorts of Hollywood stories I can tell, but the exciting thing about that is really a entrepreneurial journey of problem solving. Storytelling is very much about trying to solve problems, which is the same journey a lot of us and the people who just pitched their projects are doing as entrepreneurs. You're essentially solving problems. I always tell people when they ask the question, are entrepreneurs made or are they born? I said, to me, you can tell the difference by how somebody looks at being an entrepreneur. If you're looking at it from a financial perspective, and I'm going to hit this number of revenue, I'm going to flip my company for X amount of revenue, you're not an entrepreneur. The entrepreneur really has to enjoy the journey to get there and the journey of problem solving along the way. That's when you know you're sitting in front of an entrepreneur, and I see them all the time on a daily basis in my business and can kind of tell right away whether they're going to be successful or not, at least with some degree of a crystal ball. So what got me out of the entertainment industry was a family trip that I did not go on. My parents, sister, and brother-in-law went and rented a cabin in New Hampshire, and at the end of the week, everybody was sad. They had to throw away their favorite big boxes of cereal and salad dressing bottles. I said, wouldn't it be great if you could have a packet of your favorite brand? And I said, ooh, it's 2004. People are trusting putting their credit cards online for the first time, which those of us who are older know what time that was. And it was the dot-com bubble had burst. This was going to be a real product that we would sell online in this new thing called e-commerce. So let's give it a shot. So we got 500 square feet in North Hollywood above a furniture store, no elevator, which was not fun for the UPS delivery guy for product coming in and leaving. And 3 months later, we were in, by the way, we had 4 shelves, computer, no employees, just me. I was still busy being a film and TV producer. This was what they now call my side hustle. And within 3 months, we had an 11,000 square foot warehouse in Newbury Park and 5 employees. And imagine walking into a commercial real estate scenario and going to a building owner and them asking you to sign a 5-year lease when you have 3 months of financials and you have to put your house on the line to do it. So luckily, we found a building owner who didn't ask for that. He actually wanted to invest in our company. We said no, but he let us kind of structure a deal where we can kind of ease into it over the course of the year. And it worked out. We stayed in that building for 11 years. Now we have 4 warehouses, 2 in Newbury Park, 1 in Camarillo, and 1 in Ohio. But that's jumping ahead. So that company was Minimus.biz, which still exists. We're ranked in the top 1,000 highest grossing e-commerce businesses in the country by Internet Retailer Magazine. So usually this kind of speaking stuff I do is on more tactical things about e-commerce marketing and all that, not just sort of telling my own story. But that has a fun thing which I've never told, which I was going to do today, a fun early beginnings of being an entrepreneur. So we carried hundreds, and now it's 2,500 SKUs of travel-sized toiletries and single-serving food items. We're basically the Amazon of miniature things, direct to you, the consumer. You can jump on your phone right now and start shopping for things for 10 cents and 50 cents and all that. But the way we originally got that stuff was a couple of stores you may have heard of called Walmart and Target and raiding their bins. So I used to go in and literally just fill up a shopping cart filled of everything they had in the store. And I'd be on the phone with my dad being like, okay, did you hit up the Pacoima Walmart? And like we'd literally be driving all over town raiding these bins. It wasn't the only place we got stuff from, but we'd start to get to know the managers and they'd be bringing in product for us. And eventually we ended up buying direct years later from Procter & Gamble and Colgate and Kraft Foods and folks like that. But it always starts hustling and sort of thinking small, no pun intended. But I don't know how many people here remember a website called dailycandy.com. Nobody. It was a huge website back in the day. And what they would do is, by the way, it sold to like NBC for like $150 million or something, and then went out of business. But they would feature, we're still around. They would feature one business every day, usually an online company, in your city, or it could be a physical one, and then they would do one for the nation. And we were the site of the nation. It was my best friend's wife who submitted us. So that, back in the day of blogging, then everybody covered that story. And my focus was, because there was no real barrier to entry to do what we were doing, I said, let's get out there and get a lot of PR, let's get a lot of attention. PR played a little differently back then. This predates social media. So I was the PR agency, and I would submit us. In fact, I called myself the vice president of marketing, so I wasn't too high up or too little. I could get people's attention. And would get out there and start pitching. If you're an entrepreneur, you should check out a website I've been using for 16 years called helpareporter.com, otherwise known as Haro. It's free, and journalists put out their requests on a daily basis, and you can pitch for stories. Great way to get free media. I see people pulling out their pens. It's Haro, H-A-R-O, or helpareporter.com. There's another one called ProfNet, which I think costs money now. But one of the other things, by the way, is we decided not to take any venture capital money. So my parents and I own 100% of all of our companies that I'm about to mention. And I'll try and talk really fast so I can get to some Q&A afterward. So we immediately realized we were also in the wholesale industry. So people, not just individual consumers wanted these miniature products, so did hospitals, cruise ships, sports teams, government agencies. And we also supply NASA, the astronauts on the space station, with all their condiment packets and hummus and cheese. And there's a fruitcake story that was I'm going to save to the very end about how we ship fruitcake into space. So that was a nice teaser that we put in there. But that led us also, because we were warehousing all those things and not just doing it wholesale, we started doing kitting. People would say, can you put that, and that into a kit, logo it. So all of a sudden we're in what's called the promotional products industry. That's where you get all your logoed hats and pens and frisbees and things. So we were a kit builder and entered into the promotional products industry, and to this day still have a full division of people designing, quoting kits and doing kit assembly. So yet another sort of piece of business that tacked on to that. And then if people remember the Iraq War, and if they know of the USO, for the first time ever, the USO decided to set up morale and welfare centers at every outpost in Iraq, Afghanistan, and Kuwait. And they had never done anything like this before, and they came to us and they said, hey, Minimus, and hey, Paul, can you do this in 2 weeks? Here's a list of everything we need. And I said, well, in 2 weeks, I can do your toiletries and your food items. We carry that, but in these quantities, I'm going to need to bring in, I need some time to bring it in. And I can do everything else, but just not now. So they said, okay, and they spent millions of dollars on Amazon.com and BestBuy.com, and they're not professional buyers. And 8 of their executives went down to their warehouse and packed up everything, and they said that was a nightmare. So after they got it, the pilot worked and they got funding from the Department of Defense, they said, okay, Paul, you said you could do the whole thing, right? And I said, sure, I'll see you next week in Washington, D.C. I jumped on a plane, sat in front of them, and we supplied every item for every base in Iraq, Afghanistan, and Kuwait during the war to the 5-person outpost. So it was sporting goods and PlayStations and art supplies and furniture, and ramped that all up, got a warehouse and staff and everything within 1 month and executed on that. So that was a fun project that, in fact, the coffee bean and tea leaf, we ended up supplying the whole war with short-dated coffee bean and tea leaf stuff. We actually have letters from like General Petraeus thanking us for how great the base smelled. And photos of people who built coffee shops out of stacks of coffee. So we then were looking and realizing there was this thing called Amazon that was coming. If you remember, back when Amazon was just barely starting and getting into this e-commerce game, they were starting to grow and take hold. And we said, you know what, in 10 years from now, we're just reselling other brands' stuff. We might be out of business. So we need to start thinking, what can we do differently 10 years out? So we said we need to make our own brands. We need to make our own products and not just distribute other people's stuff. So we said, all right, let's build out a factory. And we had been having all these people coming to us, assuming we manufactured all those things that we were selling, which we didn't. And so I was already touring these, what's called contract packaging factories, and realized it's a horrible industry. It's very old school, very angry, very non-entrepreneurial. They want million-piece minimum orders. And so we said, wow, this is a good spot for us to be in, not just for ourselves, but for other people. So we took one of our warehouses, converted over a small portion of it into both food and beauty, and that's since double, triple, quadrupled in its size. And so we now do what nobody else does in the country. We do both food, non-food. We do liquids, powders, particulates, packets, bottles, jars, cans, bags, kosher, organic certified. So the reason that's growing is what I started out by saying is how easy it is to be an entrepreneur these days. So there's so much entrepreneurship happening that having a company that can support that is causing us to grow rapidly, which then leads into the next company. And the next thing we did is people said, okay, great, you're doing my little minis. Can you do my full sizes? Sure. And then they said, okay, well, you're fulfilling your own stuff, B2C and B2B. Can you fulfill mine too? Oh, okay, sure. We have the warehouse, we have the people, we have the software. Why not? So all of a sudden, we created Minimus.biz, and the co-packing business, by the way, if you're checking your phones, Minimusproducts.biz is the other one. So we have a fulfillment company, which is now larger than everything I just said. So we do fulfillment for some of the top influencers, some of the top Instagrammers. We do things in beauty and food and toys and collectibles and electronics and apparel. It's a big category. So shipping all over the world. So that's again, rapidly growing business. We actually do zero advertising for that business, and it's our fastest growing business. I do that on purpose because we can't handle it if I did do advertising for it. So come to me slowly after this thing. So then, one of the other questions people always ask is, how can you possibly have a fulfillment company in Thousand Oaks, California? If anybody knows the real estate prices here or how tall you're allowed to build your buildings, that equation doesn't work. Because in fulfillment, you pay by the square foot, but you bill by the pallet. So the taller the building you can do and the cheaper your land is, the better off you are. That's why they're all located way out in like the Inland Empire and Riverside and all that. The difference is we never intended to be in that industry. So we actually work with all of our clients as if it was our own company. So we come at it from like an entrepreneur to entrepreneur type of energy, and that seems to have resonated with a lot of the clients. I think there's even a couple people here today who we're working with. And that led into even more things and I take a slight side note of one of the investments I made into a tattoo care products company called Inkies. It's inkies.com. I have no street cred for that business. I have no tattoos. In fact, at the first trade show I attended, I was not allowed to work the booth because I would have been the corporate guy. So I was the photographer. And in fact, I had to go out and buy skate shoes and get some shirt with like a skull on it or something, and just to kind of fit in with the vibe of it. But That was a great opportunity. It was another entrepreneur who had seen a need in his industry of products that weren't being made for the tattoo artist and the tattoo collector. He had developed some formulations. He was fulfilling out of his garage. His website was crashing, and he wanted to expand his business. And he also had a ton of the famous artists in the world endorsing his product for free. So I was like, well, wait a minute, let me get this straight. You need somebody who knows how to do fulfillment. You need somebody who knows how to do co-packing, who knows e-commerce. And you need a few dollars to do some growth of your production. And you have all these famous people endorsing your stuff for free. Like, so sign me up. So 6 years later, which was about a year and a half ago, sold my interest in that company for a huge multiple of what I started with. So that was fun. We grew it from his garage to probably the #1 brand in the world in tattoo care products. So that was a fun journey to be on in a weird space. I know way more about tattoos than I should. So then we were busy doing all these different things. And if you know the company Mondelez, they split off from Kraft. They own a brand called Nabisco. Things like Oreos, you might know. So we had been working a lot with the Kraft people pretty closely, and when they split off to Mondelez, some of their people came to us and said there's a phenomenon happening in the food service distribution industry. If you've ever seen trucks on the highway that say Cisco or US Food Service, those are the two companies in the country, the only two national companies that do food service distribution. In fact, they tried to merge and got blocked from doing so. But they said the problem is those companies were moving away from being customer-centric into being finance-focused, which means every spot in their warehouse, they were rationalizing as to what should be in there. So they were saying, okay, we can make more money on frozen food and private label than we can on branded packaged snacks. So some slots were disappearing. So they said, hey, can you help us fill in the holes that are being left behind in distribution? So I said, sure. We can do that. It kind of came out of our wholesale division. Why not? So actually ended up having to set up a whole nother separate company because you get special rebates and deals when you deal on a national basis with a lot of these buyers and sellers in that industry. And then moved over into the vending, micro market, and office coffee service side of that industry, working with some of the, in fact, right now we're working with one of the top brokers in that space who works with a lot of those major food brands. So when I met him recently, he let me drive his McLaren that he picked me up in. So when you make a cut of everything in vending machines that you see in the country, you do pretty well. But that side of the industry has another issue. There's one distributor who has an 80% market share of all distribution. So they need some assistance also in filling in holes and needs and things that aren't being done by that main distributor. And that industry, one of the most interesting things about it, I found, compared to everything else I was working in, it's a very old school industry, and there's still some of those around, where everybody knows everybody, and if you're not an insider, they won't work with you. So you really have to bring insider people from that industry onto your team. And I've been doing a lot of plane flying, which is why I have a slight sinusy thing going on right now, flying all over to different conferences and different meetings and different things, because it's all about in-person business, which is sort of a lost art these days. Some older folks may remember the days of flying around and meeting people in person, and now it's all done, sometimes never even talking to the person, you're just emailing. But I do encourage people, it means a lot, and you can change a whole dynamic of a situation sitting in front of somebody, even for a short meeting or going to dinner or something. So getting on a plane and meeting with people, especially in certain industries, can make or break a situation. That then led into meeting another very successful serial entrepreneur, not in cereal, like we have little boxes and bowls of cereal we sell, hence the serial entrepreneur. Bigger, way successful, more than me, and been around many more years. And I was saying, hey, I'm sitting with a lot of these companies, I'm making their product, I'm fulfilling their product, I'm helping them with sales. They're offering me 5% equity in their company just to stay on and be an advisor, and I'm saying no, because I know, like the tattoo business, I'll get sucked into spending way too much time on it than I should. So we said, hey, let's just put money into it, own a bigger stake, and use our respective infrastructures and networks to really help them grow. There's a lot of businesses, and there's probably people here too, where I see it. They have a great vision. They grow their business to $1 million, maybe $2 million, and all of a sudden they have to change and start acting with a lot of other business skills and tactics than just their vision and the brilliance of their product carrying them there. And that's where a lot of entrepreneurs fail. So that's the piece where he and I have been around the block and can help people kind of navigate that space. So also for people, you need to evaluate yourself and understand if you're a great visionary but not as good in execution and understanding all those pieces, and bring people onto the team. Doesn't have to be me, but somebody who's been around the block and done that in order to help you navigate that critical point, because that's a make or break point with a lot of entrepreneurs. That leads into the most recent business and thing we're doing. I know that people are going, how does he have time to do this? Married with kids, 3 rabbits, they keep me busy too. But we realized we were having a lot, with all this movement and entrepreneurship, we're starting to have a lot of influencers and celebrities wanting to become entrepreneurs. And they need partnerships and back-end people to actually execute on all this, because it's not their specialty. So a lot of them and their management and their marketing firms are trying to help them do that and coming to us to partner up and be that back-end person to support that. So we're developing a new sort of entity. Since we're already doing this, we have about half a dozen joint ventures already done in that space. So we're kind of formalizing it and building an entity out of it. So finding people who have clever products, might even be people here pitching things, where it's going to be a long, hard journey to potentially roll the dice and become successful or have amazing skill and do it. But pair it with somebody who can bring a lot of eyeballs to the space. You step back and take a lesser ownership in your thing, and all of a sudden you're off and running because you've got a plugged-in infrastructure to take it and turn it into something. So that's what we're starting to do, is finding clever products, pairing it with people who can bring a ton of eyeballs to it. Everybody owns a piece together, and sort of an interesting business model that fell in our lap inadvertently. I wrote down a few things here that I thought would be helpful in terms of what I thought have been our reasons for success in navigating that journey that I just went through. I don't know how long it's been that I've been talking, but one of the things I realized is we have always focused on being 1.5 steps ahead. And the reason I say 1.5 steps is most people are 1 step ahead, but you always have to have a little piece focused on what's next after that. Because if you're not, you could still get caught if you're not planning. Some things need more advanced planning: real estate, staffing, structure. There's a lot of things you have to pay attention to about where you're headed with your business, not just what's next. So that's one of the things we've always focused on, and making sure our structure that we're building along the way isn't going to pigeonhole us into something that prevents the growth from happening. The other one is we have weekly meetings to improve our systems in all of our companies. So I bounce around to different companies and buildings and staffs to sit and figure out what systems that we're working on need improvement. So we meet every week to figure out what we can do better about something. We probably don't pat ourselves on the back as much as we should, or pat each other on the back as we should. We focus on everything bad. But it's been a way to make sure we don't have a critical business-killing misstep on something. The other thing we do is we take all of our profit and we funnel into hiring new employees. So all of the growth is based on employee growth. We have not had a problem with sales and people coming to us, but in order to grow, you need people. So that has been the biggest focus, and I think Greg Monterosa, give a shout out to Gary Vaynerchuk. He's a big believer in that too. If you don't know who that is, Gary Vaynerchuk, you should start watching some of his stuff and listening to podcasts. Great motivator in the space. The other thing we do is we try small things first before diving deep. Everybody knows the website Orbitz. I believed years ago that was our holy grail for travel sizes. If we could be in the checkout screen on Orbitz, game over. That's it. So I called up Orbitz, like, what is it going to take to advertise to be on your checkout? And they're like, oh, we'll do a test run for $10,000. I don't know about you, but when we were starting out, $10,000 is a lot of money. So I was like, well, maybe we should do it. And I was talking to my folks, and we're like, well, should you do one thing for $10,000 or 10 things for $1,000? I was like, you know what? I'd rather do 10 things for $1,000. By the way, I don't think we ever did 10 things for $1,000. But what was interesting is several months later, this shoe bomber thing happened, and TSA came up with this 311 rule, and I was on CNBC the day that happened as the expert in travel sizes and what that would mean to the travel size industry. I drove down to Universal, and they put makeup on me, and I was sitting behind the anchor desk talking about travel sizes. But the Orbitz came to us immediately after that and said, we want you to be on our checkout page. And I was like, all right. And they became an affiliate of ours. So they earned affiliate commissions for being on our website. And if you can take a guess about how much money they earned after a month of having advertising be on the checkout page, and not just there, but in the email confirmation you would get after you booked a flight or a hotel. Anybody take a guess how much money they earned? 1.5 million, is that your guess? They earned $8 and change. Because, a lesson learned after the fact, what do you do after you've spent all that time looking for the perfect flight and perfect hotel? Anything else. You're not shopping for travel-sized toiletries on some website. You're done, you're exhausted. If you do a lot of traveling, you're exhausted about trying to find the perfect flight and connection and hotel and all that. And when you get that confirmation email, you're looking on that banner and clicking on buying your travel sizes, right? No, you're like, print it out, that's my information. In fact, now you don't even print it out, it's just on your phone. This was before that. So anyways, that was a lesson. Had we done that, it would have been 10 grand down the tubes. So that's been the kind of lesson we always carry forth is try something small, even though there's things that sound amazing. We constantly get people pitching us things that are really cool add-ons for our website and all that. I'm like, all right, let me try it small, otherwise I'm not interested. It's super cool, I bet it would work, I'm not gonna risk it. And I say that day in and day out, constantly, to the point where now I don't even bother anymore because I know they're not gonna work. Because of our margin and all that, I mean, teeny margin, so most of those things don't have the ROI. The other thing is we've always been opportunity driven. So as like you could tell in that story, anytime there was something that took us in a direction that felt like a natural offshoot of what we were doing, we did it. I didn't go and open a restaurant. That would have been too far outside of kind of the hub and spoke theory of what we're doing with our business, where everything's connected to sort of a central thing. And when we do have those opportunities, we look at what is the risk reward profile of how much time is it going to take and what's the reward going to look like. Because there are a lot of things that can divert your time, which is one of your most important assets. And if you spend it on something that has a little chance of maybe big success, probably not worth it. The other thing is the right thing at the right time in history. I'm a big fan of trying to follow what's happening in society. And having seen like the dot-com bubble burst, I'm like, what if there was physical product online and some of these other things about like what's happening in the food service distribution industry and the changes and the needs happening. And you know, if there's an opportunity that can be served in any industry, that's a timing thing to take advantage of in history. You know, if you weren't advertising on Google when it was 5 cents a click, because you didn't believe in it or everybody else around you was doing it, so it can't be too good to be true. Well, there are a lot of things happening that are too good to be true. And you got to find what those things are and have the right thing at the right time in history in terms of what's happening in society. So that's the other thing to look at with any business that anybody's doing. It may even be looking at it with a slight modification to what you're doing to say, how can I fit into a need that's happening right now or about to happen in society and history. And then the other biggest thing is having passion for what you're doing. As I started out in the beginning, if you're not really enjoying the journey and passionate about the journey, you're going to get burnt out. Because if it's about the money and it doesn't happen right away, it won't carry you through. And the last thing I'll end on after blabbering on all this time is how we got fruitcake into space. So years ago, our customer service department gets a phone call and it says, hey, we actually called the customer, and in fact it wasn't NASA, they use a different name for their food lab and everything. So, because we were out of a product for this random online customer, and it was Subi honey packets. And we said, hey, our customer service person said, can we swap out Kraft honey packets? And they're like, sorry, we can't. This is going up on the space shuttle, and we've already tested it in the food lab and cleared Subi honey. space shuttle. So the person doing customer service comes running in and goes, Paul, do you know, like, we sell NASA and space shuttle and goes up space station? I'm like, no. And like, they're buying on our online website. So I called them back. I was like, stop buying on the online website. Go to our wholesale department. We'll take care of you and all that. And they're like, oh, great. This is awesome. And I was like, can we do a press release about this? And they're like, sure. And I'm like, and I go online and look, like, for months they've been buying like ketchup packets and barbecue sauce and hot sauce and like all these different things. So I'm calling up every company. We had the CEO of Heinz do a joint press release with us about, sending packets in space. By the way, years later, my daughter did a field trip to the California Science Museum, and there's a space food display there, and she took a picture of it, not knowing that, shows me the picture, and I'm like, that's our packets that went into space in the museum. So one day they called me up and like, Paul, you've been really helpful. I've got an astronaut going up, and for the holidays they want to get fruitcake, but we have a problem. We're a government agency, and it can't have rum in it, but it needs to be preserved for 2 years. So if anybody knows anything about fruitcake, that's how you preserve fruitcake. It's with rum. So I said, challenge accepted. And so I took some time out of my schedule, and I called every fruitcake manufacturer in the United States, and they all use rum. So then I said, all right, I'm going to expand my search and go worldwide. And I found an abbey of monks in the United Kingdom that for like 400 years have been making fruitcake without rum, preserved for 2 years. So they got all excited, and they shipped me 6 fruitcakes for free. And NASA tested them out. Passes, goes up to space. The astronaut loves it, emails the Abbey from the space station thanking them for the delicious fruitcake, and they came to me, can we do a press release about this? I'm like, I know who to talk to. So they did that, and then 2 years later, NASA calls me up again and says, hey, the astronaut's going up again. Can I get some fruitcake? And I said, sure, and this time they charged me $65 a fruitcake, but we did it again. So I have some friends who always like to introduce me as the guy who put fruitcake into space. So that's my story, and happy to get questions that may come up, or if Mike wants to lead the Q&A.
Fruitcake in space. That's like a movie title. Who has a question?
You can ask me anything.
Fascinating story. I'm just wondering, like, as you're encountering all these various opportunities, like with this fruitcake example, even though clearly the benefit could be like PR because NASA's your customer, but how do you sort of evaluate the cost and reward of all these opportunities?
That's a really good question. In fact, that is a constant thing on my mind every day, all throughout the day, at every turn. So you're always having to look at what are all the pros and cons, what are the costs, what are the rewards, what things could go wrong, what things could hurt my business. Like, you have to evaluate a whole bunch of parameters on the fly. Sometimes you whiteboard it. Sometimes one of the best things I find is you find a few people that you really trust and believe in, that who've been around the block and can help be your sounding boards for those kind of things. And you kind of kick it around. You may have an inkling, an instinct about something, about whether you should do it or not, or what the risks are, but kind of bouncing it off of another person or two. Usually maybe somebody within your company, usually also somebody outside your company. And I have those people that I talk to, both inside and outside the company, constantly with different things, or even sometimes different people depending on what the issue is, because they may have a particular expertise or knowledge about how to look at a situation maybe differently than I'm looking at it.
Next question.
Paul, every good company is based on values. So can you share what your values are for your company?
Sure. Good question. She's got a PhD in this subject, by the way. We are always, from the very beginning, focused on the customer. And in fact, in life, I always try to put myself in the shoes of anybody else I'm talking to, doing business with. In fact, even tonight, I was trying to figure out, how do I tell my story and add value to the room without just me telling my story? So you need to put yourself in the shoes of the other person always, and that's, in this case, the customer, it's your employees. I went to the Wharton School at the time when finance was a big thing. I had friends who went onto Wall Street working 120 hours a week, making a fortune, but crying every time they would come home from work. I said, I don't want a company environment that's like that. I want a place that people can enjoy being, that feels like fun. We always have a family atmosphere. Today we had a pizza lunch for all of our staff. And in fact, I made that point because what we do is we go, this is everybody who packs boxes, no matter what it is, and all department heads get up and talk about what's happening in their area. I talk about what's happening with the company as a whole, because I never wanted a corporate environment where people felt distant from everything that was happening. So getting people to feel like they're connected to what they're doing and what the end results are of the fruits of their labor within the company was important to me. And so I think that answers it, hopefully, like creating that right environment for employees and then having the focus of thinking like a customer thinks.
Next.
Kind of a follow-up to that. So you feel like it's kind of like a family atmosphere at your company, but how do you balance that with still the authoritative role that, I'm the boss at the end of the day, and, what I say,
Good
I'm
question.
not exactly your friend, but,
Right.
I'm friendly with you.
By the way, it goes both ways. I have to tell my mom she's not allowed to hug people. It's not in the state of California, at least. You do have to balance that. And corporate culture is one of the hardest things to do, and the hardest things, which is what you were getting at, I think, too. And something we've, over 16 years, it's changed. And we've had times where, like, nobody wanted to show up at work. And then we finally realized it was one person. There was one person, what I would call the rebel rouser. And by removing that person, changed the entire dynamic of the company. So sometimes you have to understand what's happening and understand where those things are coming from. But to answer that more directly, you do have to set that right tone. You have to understand, like, to what degree you can be kind of friendly with people and what degree is a business-like atmosphere. And it's a tough line, again, especially these days compared to times in the past, and especially in the state of California. There are very clear lines, and a lot of companies cross those lines. We don't, but how do you stay friendly? Well, you can't. You're almost told not to be friendly. So it is hard, but it's a constant thing we do pay attention to, is the idea of corporate culture.
Next question.
Where do you see the key opportunities? You said that you look and scope out what's going on in the world now and check out where there's opportunities. I wonder where you see that there is opportunity.
Wow, if I knew all that, I'd have more companies. Yeah, that's a good question. A lot of it is just paying attention to what the dynamics are that are happening around you. And if people think of what life was like when you were younger versus what it's like now, and understand the changes that have happened and where those changes still haven't finished, that's where I think the real answer is. If you look at when you had to research something when you were younger, where did you go? The library, right? How many people here have been to a library, other than George, who's in the audience, who works at a library? It's hardly. How many people look everything up here, and all their answers are right here? So this is massively changing how our society works, and it's still changing. Greg talked about TikTok. There's probably people here who don't even know what that is. My daughters do. But there are things like that if you can pay attention to where society is headed, where their eyeballs are focused, the idea of influencers. My kids do not watch television anymore. They watch YouTubers. That's unheard of. I mean, how much television did us older people watch when we were younger, and Saturday morning cartoons and all that stuff? And now people are watching YouTube, and television is like barely used. So there are things like in my industry and what I'm working in, food is huge right now. Healthy food that used to be like, you have those people who live up in Ojai or whatever and shop at Whole Foods. Like, no offense to people who live in Ojai, because I know people here who live in Ojai. But now that's become real. That's become a huge. If you look at some of the numbers and reading these articles about what's happening in food, some of these major food companies, for the first time in their 100-year history, are slowing their growth. First time ever, because they were caught behind the times. That happened so fast, this move to healthy eating. So anybody who has a healthy food brand, if you hit $10-20 million, you're getting bought by one of the big players for like a 10 times multiple, like unheard of valuations. So the healthy food and beverage space is super hot right now. It used to be a horrible space to be in as an entrepreneur or investor, but tremendous opportunity in that space. So yeah, there's a bunch of things. I said anything that connects to influencers and where the eyeballs and media is going is hot. Food, I'm sure there's a bazillion other ones. But if you really pay attention to, again, where things are headed societally, that's where you find the answers.
And if you do want to go to a library, George, raise your hand again. George Winkler is in charge of the Russell Fisher Business Collection at the Camarillo Library. So go visit George. We don't want him to be lonely.
I got one right here. Can you tell us a little bit about your perspective on building strategic partnerships when you were earlier out in the gate? I think they're really important and underutilized. So how do you go about, finding a strategic partner and building the relationship with them?
Really good question. I always tell FedEx they're not our vendor, they're our partner, and they treat us that way too. And there's a bunch of folks like that. We have our box company that does our custom boxes for our client, ended up needing overflow space, and we were moving into a big warehouse and we couldn't quite afford the whole warehouse, and they needed some space, and so we partnered up. And so you start to build some of these relationships, even with vendors and people you're paying to go beyond just that sort of vendor relationship into really a strategic relationship with a lot of these folks. And it also helps because if you, like with FedEx, and we're doing a big project and we need to do some special things that are out of the box, like they're so entrenched in understanding our business, they can go to bat for us internally because they understand it. So I guess the answer to that is a little bit more sort of high level in terms of treating it as a relationship with everybody you're working with, because you never know where there might be ways you can help each other on something. I don't know if that kind of covers it. But in terms of other kind of strategic partnerships, the other thing is just internally understanding what you're good at, what you're not good at. I know what I'm not good at, and making sure you hire people around you or partner with people around you that can do the things you know you're not good at, because nobody here is good at everything, including me. So you have to understand, and by the way, also understand what you're passionate about, what you're most excited about doing within your company. Focus on that, because that's going to carry you through, and find all the other things, like, I don't know if it's accounting or whatever, and get other people to do that. Do all the things that you don't like doing or that you know you're not good at.
Okay, so my question was, how many hours per week would you estimate you spend on your business and self-development? This question is stemming from an article that I recently read on Forbes, and it explains self-care is not an indulgence. Self-care is a discipline. I find myself struggling with spending so many hours on work and self-development. I'm having a guilty feeling of spending time with family who's flying into town. So again, the question is, how many hours per week would you estimate you recommend spending on business and self-development?
I love that question, because that one's debated all the time, especially amongst entrepreneurs. And there's a bigger answer to that. In the beginning of your company, at least for me, in the first several years, you're working a lot of hours because there's a lot to do and you don't have a lot of people that can do it. It's really you and a few people, and there's a ton of work. So you're working 14 hours a day, 16 hours a day. And anytime you're not working, you are feeling guilty that you're not working. There's more. I still feel that way. Like if I only worked more on the weekend, I could get X number of more clients and do more things. And the two biggest times that changed One is the moment I didn't have to be the person to do every job. So invariably somebody's out sick or on vacation, and I was always the person who had done the job, so I'm the person who knew how to do the job. And once you grow the company to the point where you can cross-train people and you don't have to be the person there every day, that completely changes your need to be the one who puts in all those hours. And so then it changes. The other time is when I had kids. And when you have kids, your life, things that are important completely change. And in fact, you become more efficient with your work and you cut out all the BS stuff that you were doing before, and you only focus on the real things that are really going to pay off. And all the other like wasted time you don't have time for it anymore. So it goes away. I'm a big believer in complete veg out time. So I spend even like a full day on the weekends where I'm just watching TV or Netflix, or I'm playing Fortnite on my phone. So I got pretty good at it. But you need that mind, like literally your mind just completely veggies out. That's the only way. If you're going, you're gonna burn yourself out. So it is important, but it does change. In the beginning, you're almost sort of forced into putting in the extra hours, but the idea is to understand that there's going to change, and then start to prepare for that. Start to realize you need to cross-train people. Don't just train them for the job they're doing. Train them to do also somebody else's job. So that way you always don't have to be the person that fills in all the gaps.
You have time for one more.
All right, so all these questions have kind of been like where your company is now. And since I'm really early in the game. I just came to CLU from Chicago, incoming freshman. And I'm wondering, what were you like in your early teens, early 20s, late teens, getting into it? How did you start up? Did you have like influences, stuff like that? Any recommendations, tips that you have?
That's another really good question. These are really great questions people have. I'm impressed. So the big difference is wisdom. I have more of it now from experience and age and life than I did when I was your age. And knowing that I didn't have it then, I could have made a lot of wrong moves in the growth of the company, which gets back to some of the earlier questions about understanding you don't have all the right answers and don't have a big ego about it, and realize you need to bounce things off of other mentors or people. You need to have strategic partners. All these other questions sort of tie into that answer. Is understanding you can't be the one who's good at everything. You have to find the things you're good at and the ones you aren't, and fill in the gaps with other people. So it's a little bit about having that passion and energy and motivation, but also being humble and realistic and self-evaluative, if that's a word, at the same time. Because you haven't had the wisdom to know what the road is that lies ahead. But it's a fun road. I wouldn't want to do anything else.
Okay, we'll end on that note. Let's give Paul one more big round of applause.